It's fine, it's Sweden.
That's not fine. Why is it like that?
The beaming smiles of a feel-good romance, the wincing flinches of a knockdown drag-out brawl, or me, fast asleep during The Horse Whisperer. A cursory glance across the theatre aisles at an audience's collective reaction is usually enough to know whether they're invested or indifferent. With horror, the room's much harder to read. Aside from sudden jolts brought on by cheap jump scares that are as boring as they are bothersome, these crowds are typically a sea of seat-clenched anticipation. So, why is my immersion so often shattered by the sound of laughter?
Excuse me.
In some cases, it's because what we're watching is a stumbling failure, but this phenomenon isn't reserved for stupid splatter. Even the best the genre has to offer are not immune to tension-killing chuckles. Throughout the genuinely unnerving escalations of The Babadook, The Witch, and Hereditary, the same thing happened. A distant giggle grew to a hearty, horrendous laugh. Maybe it's the fear of being frightened, putting on a brave face for your friends by making light of the looming fear. Perhaps it's boredom at the deliberate pacing of slow burn scares. The uncontrollable urge to let some of the pressure out of the room, even if it diminishes the overall experience for everyone else. Earlier this year, I saw Midsommar. Upsetting imagery flowed into repulsive revelations, gore gives way to guttural cries, and you know what I did? I laughed. Often, awkwardly, and with great relish.
Are you serious?
Now that is in no way a slight against the film itself. The to and fro between shock and silliness is not only intentional, it's also one of its most measured and unsung strengths. The link between horror and comedy is nothing new. From Abbott and Costello and Carry On Screaming, right up to the more recent meta-excursions into dank despair, it's as much a staple of the genre as vampires and creepy ventriloquist dummies. With Midsommar, the comedic sensibility isn't merely dark or reflexive.
It'll probably seem very silly, but it's like theatre.
We're presented with a mixture of the cerebral scares of critically acclaimed cult horror and the camp calamity of its sillier siblings. Just as its central dynamic is the crumbling, cancerous relationship between Danny and Christian, the core of the narrative relies on the existential terror of inconceivable foreign customs scraping harshly against Western ideals of morality and community that confront the malleability of terms like good in the face of tradition and heritage. The result? Sprinklings of absurdity, cringing encounters, and levity balanced on the edge of a knife. Don't get me wrong, first and foremost, this is horror cinema, which in turn gives way to the kind of humour you immediately feel kind of guilty for giggling along with. A dignified and respectful ceremonial sacrifice botched to the point of sympathetic head smashing, bizarre, inconsolable howling sorrow juxtaposed with the panting adulterous sex of a significant other, bare-suited human immolation, which I'm choosing to believe is a reference to Nicolas Cage in the god-awful Wicker Man remake, and this voluntary human sacrifice realising a little too late that being burnt alive while everyone else watches Austin Powers is the shittiest straw you could ever draw. Even at its darkest, the near-permanent day glow finds its way in. Midsommar is constantly compared to the one pagan horror flick everyone's heard of. Granted, the setting makes for easy comparisons, but the trajectory Danny traces sits somewhere far lower brow. Some of the smaller nods to its forebears come by way of an aerial tracking shot that echoes the calm before the storm opening sequence of The Shining, the much commented on use of the unsettling disfigured individual that crops up in hundreds of genre features, and one preposterously staged death that calls to mind the criminally underappreciated Hannibal. However, structurally speaking, Midsommar is a winking send-up of the knife-wielding, student-stabbing slasher genre. If you plot out the course of events, the culling of the cast one by one as they peek ever deeper into the workings and routines of this enigmatic community, it's a procession of outright goofy tropes taken to their logical, by which I mean completely illogical, conclusion. First to face the chopping block are the barely named nobodies who exist to recoil, attempt an escape, only to die off screen. Next we have the comic relief, the sex-starved and deeply insensitive Mark, a young man who takes a steaming hot American piss over the sacred history of this isolated cult. Josh, the knowledgeable, informative person of colour amongst this predominantly Caucasian community, meets his demise soon after. As we creep towards the blood-curdling finale, it's time to bid farewell to the hunky love interest Christian, immediately after he has sex on screen, which leaves us with the survival of Danny, or as she would more commonly be known, the final girl. It's every copy-paste slasher, dolled up and adorned with artisanal wares and rustic warmth. More than that, it's a hangman's joke at the expense of those wearing the noose. From the opening still of a tapestry that, in effect, gives away every major death and plot beat, writer-director Ari Aster is flashing the audience a wicked but welcoming smile. It's the confidence of a card shark leaving his hand face up, but still managing to bluff everybody at the table. For as literary-minded and informed as these individuals think themselves to be, they're just as dim-witted as any typical 20-something in these genre trappings. This has led some to cry plot hole and criticise the logic of the film, with many lamenting the poor decision-making and near absence of self-preservation on the parts of such well-educated young adults. At numerous critical points, the tapestry, the peculiar behaviour, a massive bear, an ominously off-colour beverage, the blood red flags are waved so glaringly they can only be missed by a group this self-absorbed. And
that's the joke.
The many shades of selfishness butting heads against a community of pathological and utterly incomprehensible selflessness, it's a shaking reality check of Generation Y, cultural tourism, and the desperately, hypocritically woke. Like lambs to the slaughter, we mawkishly endure increasingly repugnant situations that would have anyone with even a modicum of sanity running straight for the nearest tree line. So why don't they? For one thing, so long as the bad things aren't happening directly to them, they either don't care or see it as a golden opportunity for qualitative research at the expense of the living and dead alike.
Holy shit, right? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
What's more fascinating is the alternative. They're so muted in their response because they don't want to be seen to hurt anyone's feelings.
Hey.
Hi. Sorry.
In an age where much needed empathy, cultural awareness, and conscientious conduct have been co-opted as social currency, it pays to endure a great deal to maintain a facade of even-handed understanding.
We would just be so embarrassed to be connected to this in any way, shape, or form.
After the brutal cliff-jumping genocide should put an immediate full stop to the idea of quaint festivities, our young Americans have a shocked cry, that is, if they didn't nap through it, then get right back on with their maypole dancing and summer revelry. The refusal to denounce performative and ritualized suicide, call out blatant sexism, or take an affirmative stance against what even the most liberal-minded would call barbaric nonsense, is emblematic of the dangerous ineffectiveness of an all-encompassing live and let live mindset.
I'm trying to keep an open mind, though. It's cultural, you know?
While certainly commendable as an ethos, there have to be limits. These characters tie themselves up in knots trying to toe the line between respecting a different way of life and the common sense internal screams of, "For the love of God, if you stay here, you're going to die." Just as Shirley Jackson's short story The Lottery is, to quote Kent Brockman,
a chilling tale of conformity gone mad.
Midsommar is a self-aware slice of the many different ways and reasons we conform, for the greater good, and for the burned alive in a big wooden barn. The willing march towards our own doom out of social constructs or obligations has been touched on elsewhere, famously depicted in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Spoiler for a 15-year-old book.
It's hard to believe that fear of offending can be stronger than the fear of pain, but you know what? It is.
Midsommar suggests the adherence to a group mentality can both be a purifying saving grace, one where we surrender our private anguish to the communal body, and the literal death of self. Dani is spared by unshackling her perception of worth and validation from a toxic relationship and the baggage it brought into her life, while those that rigidly conform to their westernized, boorish self-interests are struck down because of it. Whereas the loss of Dani's family has taken so much from her, here we see Christian's death as a transcendent moment of awakening. A chance to gain a new family and belong at the heart of something, as opposed to a cold existence on the periphery of affection. Horror and humour. Love and contempt. Kinship and animosity. Reaping and sowing. In lesser hands, these conflicting ideas and their presentation as the symbiotic strands of a larger narrative could have led to an identity crisis of whiplash-inducing indecisiveness. Instead, Midsommar is a medley of many different things, and an absolute triumph. One that left me smiling and sick to my stomach. Special shout out to our Patreon producers Jennifer C, Claire MD, and Paul of the Pauls, as well as all these judo-certified individuals who help us out over on Patreon. I'd really like to know how your screening reacted to Midsommar. Was it fear, laughter, trepidation, or disinterest? Let me know in the comments. The best way you can support the channel is to share, like, subscribe, and leave a comment below for us and all that other rubbish. Or if you'd like to sign up for our film club, additional reviews, and your name in the credits, check out the link for our Patreon in the description below. Thank you for watching. Until next time, this is In Frame Out.